for me, the kayak is so good for it because we can just point the boat at where we want to be, just let off and cruise right on into them. I mean, there's so many times we'll just like we don't want to be full speed and just crash into everything, but couple back strokes and just ease in there if we bump.
Welcome to the Kayak Bass Connection podcast. Hey, this time we're going crappie. We're going crappie fishing. So we usually focus on bass in this podcast, but tonight we are going to talk about the new multi-species tournament the Southern Illinois Kayak Club has starting this year. And we've got three great crappie anglers who are going to join us and talk about what it's going to take to make a good showing here in April when crappie is the species of the month for the Southern Illinois Kayak Club. So I have with me Josh Lincoln, director of the club from St. Louis, Missouri, and Matt Bennett out of West Frankfort, Illinois, and Darren Hemker out of Germantown, Illinois. So, well, currently, as you can see, Darren is at an unknown lake pedaling.
Carlisle.
I presume he has a he's at Carlisle. All right. The blue sky and no crappie, from what I understand.
Pretty bad.
So, guys, thank you all for taking time to be with us tonight.
Happy to be here.
So, I've got three really good crappie fishermen on here and one that knows nothing about crappie fishing. That's me. Haven't done it in probably 30 years. Used to go out occasionally with my dad. So, when I noticed that we have a lot of newer anglers that are maybe new to bass fishing or new to tournament fishing, they're going to be in this multi-species event potentially. So where do you think somebody needs to start if they're looking at fishing for crappie in April?
I'll go ahead and start on that. If we're talking April, for me, a lot of times once we get into April, these fish have pushed up. We're not waiting for these fish to be shallow anymore. In March, we can kind of be looking that second week of March toward the end. We're really looking to see if they're up shallow. April, they're there. So we're really looking for where can we find these crappies staged up shallow and try and get on these big females. Spring, for me, it's a lot of we're getting those really big females. We'll get some of those 13, 14, 15-inch fish and a lot of those 9 and 10-inch fish. There's not a lot of that in between those nice 11 and 12-inch fish that we all love to catch, love to eat. I find those hard to find, at least on Wren Lake in the spring, where we're getting those big females and we're getting eaten fish. So I'm up shallow and I'm trying to find where I can find those big females staging. And for me, that's a lot around the buck brush, shallow, thick, nasty brush on Wren Lake in particular.
Okay. And Wren would be probably kind of stereotypical for a Southern Illinois lake. What's the water clarity like there at Wren?
So right now on the north end, I've only really got about 1 foot to 2 foot of viz. And then coming down toward the south end, I've actually got 3 or 4 foot of viz right now. And I'm catching fish in both. As we get closer to the spring, that's kind of how it's going to be. I might get some rain and it be really muddy. It might stay a little cleaner and I have 3 or 4 foot of viz, but those fish are going to suck up shallow. A lot of years, we're catching them when that water comes up behind the buck brush, behind like the reeds. You'll find that water will flood behind that stuff. You're not catching it in it. You're going all the way up to the bank and catching them behind it. Like those fish will push way up in April.
Right up on the bank, literally. Right?
Get to the bank if you can. And last year was a prime example. I was pulling a lot of those 12 and 13-inch fish on Carlisle out of, believe it or not, 1 foot and less of water. I couldn't believe the size of these fish. You couldn't fish more than 8 inches deep. You dropped down 1 foot, you were touching the bottom. And I mean, these big fish were coming out of there. I'm like, I don't even understand how they're in here and I can't see them. And every once in a while, you just see a fin come out of the water. Like they were just that shallow.
Yeah, I have a lot of similar experience, particularly in like strip pit lakes. Anytime I can find like a riprap wall with like a lot of like chunk rock, I'm as shallow as I can and I'm throwing just parallel, maybe 1 foot or 2 off of that rock, and I'm just just kind of jigging it real slow, or even just like a steady reel if I'm doing a double jig, and just like it'll just like tick off those rocks, and you'll just feel that tick, and then it'll slam into it, and you're like, oh, there's one, you know. And some days they want to take the rod right out of your hand when they hit it, and other days it's just like a tick, and you're like, oh, and then you can set into them and they're there, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So are they moving up shallow to spawn? Is that why they're so shallow?
Yeah. So a lot of times here in March, that second week of March toward the end, those fish we're catching shallow are getting ready to spawn. When we're getting into April, we're really looking at these are spawning fish. At least where we are, right?
Now, how often do crappie spawn? Is it just once annually or multiple times?
I've heard different theories. I can't be 100%. I do think they spawn a couple times a year. I could be wrong. They might only spawn once, but I do think it's a couple times. I was with Josh a day, and if I'm not mistaken, this was in May when we went to Litchfield.
Yeah. It's like May 1st or 2nd.
Yeah, and Josh was on them, and we were actually, I believe, catching spawning crappie in probably 10 foot of water, 10 foot of water.
In May.
Josh was literally dragging, letting the jig go to the bottom, letting it sit there, and just moving his rod and dragging it and catching what I believe were spawning fish there. We caught a bunch of nice crappie in one little area, but they were spawning in May in like 10 foot of water.
Yeah.
When
And
we
that
get
was
into those later spawners, they tend to be a little deeper, but those early ones, April, that's shallow fish most of the time.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. I believe that was like on a bluff type wall, right? Like a rock bluff.
Yep.
Which is not typical for crappie fishing in May, I don't think. You know, I can't say how many times I've caught crappie off bluff walls. You know, usually it's structure of some sort of kind. And that would be my one tip to anybody who's fishing this tournament in April is get shallow and find structure, you know, whether that's rocks, a stump, trees, buckbrush, just find it.
Yeah. It doesn't take much for these fish to be holding on. I can think of a specific day when the fish were first coming up on a Ducoin Lake, and they weren't up yet. We had fished for probably 2 hours, and we got to a point in the lily pads, and there was one pad stem probably 3 foot out in front of everything else on that point. And my dad and I were both casting at that one pad stem and probably caught 15 keeper crappie off of one pad.
Wow.
So you just got to find that piece, and there's fish there. So you got to fish it. You got to fish thorough, because it can be one pad stem and you're just blowing it. You just miss that one spot. You fish hard. You got to really cover everything effectively, but they'll pile up when you get on them.
One of the biggest crappie I've ever seen with my own eyes came out of Ducoin. Andrew Garman, who used to fish with us, he caught about I want to say it was a 17-inch black crappie out of that lake. I'll give you the picture, Jared, so you can throw it up in there. But it was an incredible fish.
So you're focusing on shallow cover, and it sounds like any type of cover, whether it be wood. You talked about wood. Josh talked about rock. You're talking about vegetation. So any type of shallow cover, they probably lay their eggs on that cover itself. Or do you know?
I don't think they on the cover.
Dependent. Yeah, we're very lake dependent on the cover, right? You know, some guys have crappie in lakes that there's not a tree around the lake. It's all grass. So you're actually catching your fish off a clump of the grass. Maybe you're fishing over the top of the clump because they haven't reached the surface. But we are looking for anything that's there. That's where those fish are going to be in April. And probably the shallower, the better.
So if we know where to target, what do we use to target them with? What type of baits are most generally effective?
For me, it's actually what Matt taught me several years ago. I just do a double jig, and usually I use like a 1/2 ounce, two 1/32 ounce heads, just like a standard 1.5 inch tube jig. Southern Pro makes a bunch of good colors. Those are usually the ones I kind of go after. But Bobby Garland makes a bunch of awesome little baby shads and stuff like that. Really, you can go to Academy or your local sporting goods and just go down the crappie aisle, pick up a few different colors, make sure you got a chartreuse, a blue, something dark, something light, and you can't really go wrong in my book.
I want to specify on that. I think you should really, the chartreuse, I like a bright. Think red and chartreuse, think an orange and chartreuse, think a pink and chartreuse. We want a bright. We want a contrast. Think a Junebug chartreuse or black and chartreuse. We want a contrasting color. And then we want a shad color, a confidence, like he said, a blue and white. That's a personal favorite of mine. Just your white, something maybe clear, something that shad type of color. And that gives us a good starting place. We've got 3 categories. And then if we get a bite, we can start to go that direction. The other one for me, last spring in particular, I still find when we're up shallow, I only like a second or a 16th. You're fishing so shallow that heavy head's just not really necessary. But last spring on Carlisle, we were catching a lot of those fish in that foot of water on 3-inch baits. So we're not actually using these little tubes all the time. A lot of times these Southern Illinois lakes are stocked with threadfin shad. So I'm finding more and more applications where I'm applying these 2.5 and 3-inch baits. Carlisle in particular, it worked really well last spring. I didn't get bit throwing the 1.5-inch tubes. I'll sometimes go down to a 64th and a 1-inch little bluegill tube almost, catch these crappie. That was not the deal last year. They were eating a big bait. The water was really muddy. So I was catching fish in a foot of water. I couldn't see the fish. I couldn't see the bottom. They were there. I couldn't see them. And that big bait gave me the presence to let those fish know there was something there and get bites.
What size rods and line are you using typically, Matt?
When we're doing something that shallow, I like a 9 or a 10-foot rod. Got buddies that use 11s. That's too much. It's almost pushing it sometimes, but you need some length to get away from you. A lot of times my feet are in the water. We're walking around trying to get into these fish. That couple spots we were in last year, you'd have boats trying to come to the back of the cove. They could only make it halfway back. The water was just so shallow, and these fish were pushed all the way there, and I'm standing there in ankle deep water tearing them up. I mean, you can't get to these fish any other way. But 8-pound, 10-pound line, I tend to bring a rod with like a clearer line for confidence for me, and I do like one with a bright high vis line. That way, if I just see that line move, I know something may be bumped. It just gives me more awareness what's going on. But sometimes I'll get that confidence where I don't feel confident that they're going to eat on that bright line.
Yeah.
Does it always make a difference? No. But in my head, does it sometimes? Yes.
Is that more like when you're fishing clear water than dirty water? You lose that confidence in that high vis?
For me, if I'm cold, so even if we're in April, right, we get that cold front day, we drop into the season, you're kind of in the hoodie, you're shivering. That heavier line, you're not getting near as much tension on a jig. So if you actually drop to a clearer line or a fluorocarbon, where we're using just a higher quality, thinner line, you'll get more feel on that jig. Whereas, our cheaper monos, they hold their memory a little bit. They don't tend to pull as straight. You don't get as much feel. So a lot of times I'm either I prefer to actually go to 8-pound fluorocarbon, like a Sunline or I'm going to blank Seagar, in Vizex. So I'm getting a nice thin line, but I've still got my strength around all that cover.
Yeah, I think me included, and I think most crappie anglers, I always go and just buy the Mr. Crappie type cheap mono, whether it's 4 to 6 pounds, and load it up and call it good. So it's curious to see and hear from an expert on that. Maybe I'll upgrade to some
if you
P
can
line.
get away with 10-pound line, it is awesome. And you get hung up, you just reach your rod down, poke your jig out. We're saving a ton of money. If it's not working, we may have to go to 4-pound line. Now we get hung up. We've lost every jig that gets hung up, but we're getting bites again. So it's something you really need to play with. Time of year, your water clarity, those are the things that make a difference. But I typically have 8-pound line. I typically use the Mr. Crappie Camo. Our water's fairly dirty. It's broken up probably 75-80% of the time. That's all you need. But there are factors we can play with. We can go down the rabbit holes and really get into it.
Yeah, I think there was a good tip hidden in all that. It's when you're at the store, buy lots of jig heads, because you will get hung up and you will lose crappie fishing. It's just part of the game, unfortunately. And I'm curious, Matt, while we're talking about jig heads, I personally like the jig heads with the sickle hook. I feel like that's like my go-to when I'm at the store. Is there a particular hook style that you go to, or just like a standard J? Or
Yeah, when I was pouring my crappie heads, and I just don't have the time as much anymore, I pour them with sickle hooks. Now I like the moon eye jigs a lot. I found them on Amazon. They're fairly inexpensive where they have sickle hooks, but it's a number 4 hook in them. It's a good price. I use them a ton with like a Bobby Garland shad or standard little tubes. If I go up a little bit, Walmart started carrying an Arky Pro Series jig head. They're just regular painted jig heads. They're kind of inexpensive. It's like $2 or $3 for a 10 pack. And they've got a number 1 sickle hook. And I can use that in those 3-inch baits, and I can still put that on a Bobby Garland baby shad. So the hook's a little big for that baby shad, but it does work. And that's that's a hook that'll cover a lot of applications for you at an inexpensive price. I do like colored heads. Match my head colors to the jig colors, and by match I mean contrast. And a black and chartreuse, an orange head's my favorite. A red and chartreuse, a pink head's my favorite. On a pumpkin seed chartreuse, I really like a black head. Or an orange and chartreuse, a lot of times I like a black head. I that's something I personally play with. These are colored heads at an inexpensive price with a very good sickle hook that'll stick you a lot of fish.
Are you guys able to see? I'm trying to share a website here. You guys seen the Walmart website? Ah, okay.
I mean, that's not a bad price for it's a pretty darn good hook on there. I was very impressed with them. And so I went back this spring and I bought like 4 packs of each of the orange and pink and 2 packs every other color. So if that tells you what I like the most.
All right.
That's so interesting to hear, because like my confidence for sure, like color heads, is I buy white heads and I buy chartreuse heads. Those are like the two that are like, sometimes I do like the white and like soft pink where it's like white on the top and it's got like the stripes of pink and stuff like that. But I will definitely start doing some more orange in my rotation.
Even when I'm throwing, especially actually in clear water, I don't throw that white head. That doesn't give me contrast. That's the same color that looks different. And that's what it is in my head. I really like a pink head in almost all my clear water stuff with our whites and our blues. That pink head really gets a lot of work for me. And these crappie like that contrast. I mean, you can go in super clear water and throw an all pink jig with a pink jig head and you catch crappie. Same thing, all chartreuse jig head, all chartreuse jig. You'll catch a crappie. They're an aggressive fish. They're much more aggressive than we give them credit for. I've caught 7-inch crappie on a 5-inch nose hooked fluke. I mean, you'll have that much fluke hanging out of his mouth. Like, they are far more aggressive than we give them credit for. Those bright colors were triggering a reaction bite. The pink and orange, if it's dirty water, that's probably what I'm starting. If we're using 2 jigs, that's the one on the bottom. If I'm in clearer water, my pink's probably on the bottom. And then I put 2 different baits on there and we're going to play. We're going to see what those fish are doing that day. So just because I'm in clear water, I didn't put 2 pink heads on there and go, they're going to eat pink. No, I still put a pink and an orange. I put 2 different jigs on. Let's see what they want.
Isn't that amazing? Because you figure both of those colors don't.
Matt always seems to know exactly
the forage that they're after, and eating those thread fins probably most of the time. Right?
I don't know what they think it is, but having a different color head absolutely makes a difference for me. And there's times where an unpainted head is what we want. And spring can be that time. We may get real clear water, or they just may get a lot of pressure, and we want an unpainted head. And to me, that makes our presentation smaller. I think at that point, they less see the head and it makes it look smaller as a whole. And we want to go that way when we're getting on tough fish. Having that unpainted head actually is a great way to go. But especially if they're aggressive, full color, we want different color head from the bait most of the time. It gives us a third color in the jig. Like we see these tricolor tubes out there. A lot of times I'm using a 2-color tube and my head's the third color.
So what kind of what kind of tube are you using? Does it have a tail on it?
Yeah, I use a lot of, like what Josh said, the Southern Pro. Their website's fantastic, an American-made product.
I think they're based out of Arkansas, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I know Mid-South is. I'm not 100%
maybe that's what I'm thinking
Pro.
of.
Southern Pro is American-based, but I'm not 100% where they're based out of.
Yeah, okay.
But I've bought 1,000 packs of a couple of the Pro Series colors that are my favorites. But The
There
colors
you
would
go.
be Money, Kentucky Lake Killer, Junebug, and Popsicle. And that's basically a red and chartreuse, a black and chartreuse, a Junebug chartreuse, and the fourth one's Weiss Lake Killer. It's a white and chartreuse.
Yeah, those little hustlers, Jared. That's the ones that I use. And
The
then like when
Pro
you click,
Series Little Hustler is the one I'm talking about, because they've got actually some phenomenal colors in there. That black and chartreuse has red flake in the black, which I love, and the glitter in the tail. They're a little bit more expensive, but if you're picky about your colors or you want something that you feel like's going to give you an edge, that Pro Series is a good place to look.
Yeah, see here they've got a crappie shad, 1.5 inches long.
yeah, I would assume that's close to like a Bobby Garland baby shad, right?
I think that 1.5 inch one is the one with the paddle tail.
Yeah, it is. It's got a paddle tail on it.
Yeah, their baby shad mimic, I've bought 100 packs of. You can go on there. They're one that looks like the baby shad. You can go on there and buy 100 pack for, I could be wrong on this, but it's like $8. I mean, phenomenal
Super
price.
cheap. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do like personally, because we're getting into contrast. That's something you hear me talking about a lot. A lot of your Bobby Garlands, when we look at the chartreuse colors, it's a belly color and a back color. And in that Southern Pro, I can get some where it's a body color and a tail color in that baby shad. If I've got a lot of confidence in that baby shad type presentation, I can get a black and chartreuse that's got a black at the front and a chartreuse tail. That's something I really like. It gives that contrast that I find I get a lot of bites on.
Yeah, it gives you that tricolor that you're looking for, whether it's black chartreuse and an orange head or a pink head, you know.
Now, Matt, how often are you using the double jig rig? Are you ever just using one jig, or you always throw two if you can?
If we're in a foot of water, we can't fish 2 jigs. There's just nothing we can do about that. Most of the time, if I'm actually on bedding fish, I like 1 jig. I'm wanting to. We're around all the brush. We're super shallow. I've got to be able to get that jig in and out. I want to drop it. If I see a bush, I want to pull my line with my hand pull the jig up to the rod tip, and I will stick that rod tip in a bush and then let my line back with my hand to drop that jig down in there. I got to get the bite first. I may be in some nasty places where I lose a lot of fish, but I got to get a bite first. And that's how we're doing it.
How would you go about, like, a lot of the people listening to this podcast are going to be targeting crappie out of a kayak. How would you go about kind of attacking those really shallow areas in a kayak?
For me, the kayak is so good for it because we can just point the boat at where we want to be, just let off and cruise right on into them. I mean, there's so many times we'll just like, we don't want to be full speed and just crash into everything, but couple back strokes and just ease in there. If we bump the bush a little bit, that's okay. There's tons of times like today where I'm fishing docks and I'll actually take my rod and I'll tap those dock posts. And what I'm doing is it seems to stir them up. You wouldn't believe how many times I'll fish a dock post, and I'll not get a bit, or I'll quit getting bit, and I'll take my rod and I'll tap it and I'll drop my jigs back down, thump. So you're not spooking them necessarily. Sometimes you're just kind of waking up their house. We don't want to just full on crash in there, right? But bumping things doesn't necessarily mean you spooked everything off.
Yeah, kayak can definitely sneak into some of those spots that maybe somebody would run in a foot of water in a trolling motor, if they can even move their boat. It's going to make a lot of noise.
Some of those spots I fish, you couldn't, if you're not walking or in a kayak, you're just not getting to the fish.
Yeah, it's definitely a big advantage for us. I mean, for me, I'd have to pick up the pedal drive and paddle, but nothing wrong with that.
No, not if it means you're catching them.
That's right.
So what about live scope? Some of our people do use live scope. I know Darren does. Have you had any experience with that, Matt, and crappie?
No, and I'd love to, but it's not something I've ever played with. And I can tell you from what I know from talking to my buddies that do it, a lot of what we're talking about with contrast to get these bites with colors, when these guys are on the live scope, instead of playing so much with these different contrasts and maybe different colors, we're really looking at profile is what I'm hearing. So you may not even want to bring different colors out. You may want to just bring all the same color, but have a baby shad, have a little tube, have a bigger tube, have a bigger shad, and you'll find that there's a certain profile that they're eating that day. And that's like what I was talking about, sometimes I'm finding them on these bigger baits. I've got so much when I'm walking the bank, but when you're out in the boat, you've probably got your whole arsenal and you can sit here and play with these different profiles. Don't get tied into the color yet. If you don't have fish looking at it, you're probably in the wrong profile. Maybe go to a 2-inch minnow. If they don't look at that, we want to go down to say our 1.5-inch tube. They don't look at that. We go up to our shad. Well, now I've got fish at least coming up and looking. Now I can play with color. On the live scope, you can see what's going on, and I know what profile, what shape is getting those fish to rise, and then I can play with my color. But play with your profile, your size, and your shape of that bait first.
That's awesome. I wouldn't have even thought of that, Matt. I would have just started changing colors and be like, what the heck? Why aren't they reacting?
Well,
I
yeah,
wouldn't have thought to change from a tube to a baby shad. I mean, I probably would have, because those are like in my arsenal, but that's a really good approach on that. I just got lucky enough and I bought live scope for myself. So I'm curious to see how that's going to go. I was really hoping that Darren's connection was going to be good and he could give us some live on the water kind of tips and pro tips on live scope for crappie.
Yeah, he's been using live scope for a couple of years now, and he's definitely got the experience.
Yeah, I mean, just talking with him today, he said that he's a terrible crappie fisherman, but he's good at using live scope, you know? So, and he catches a mess of crappie.
Yeah, nice. So we've talked about location, we've talked about gear, and we've talked about bait. What about now, if it's some of our people from the Southern Illinois Kayak Club that are watching, Josh can explain a little bit more about how this multi-species tournament works. That's going to be featuring crappie in the first month, beginning in April.
Yeah, so it's our Master Angler Series, which I'm super pumped to be talking about. It's a great tournament series to really see who's the most well-rounded angler in SICK. We always talk about bass fishing, and we always know that Darren's going to kick our butts, but this will be who can really shines all species. So we're going to be targeting crappie in April, white bass in May, bluegill in June, catfish in July, and we're going to round it out with bass in August. But it's what it is. It's a great opportunity, especially for our newer anglers to fish for. It's $55, and you get 5 months worth of tournaments for that low price. So it's just meaningful time on the water where you can get out there, you can target a new species, you can have fun, you can kind of be competitive. And then on top of that, you're getting practice of taking fish pictures, and you're getting practice of fishing in like a pressure situation. And then you've also got like the fun and camaraderie of it, of I can be texting Darren.
So we were talking about the format of the tournament that SICK's running. So will it be ran just as a bass tournament, as you're going to number of fish and length of fish?
Yeah, so it's going to be very in the same format like we've done monthly tournaments for bass in the past. So each species, you'll get your 5 best fish will count towards your overall total. And then at the end of that designated month, whoever's in the lead, whoever wins that tournament will get 50 points, and the person in second will get 49, 48 to third, and so on and so forth, like we do our typical AOY standings. And then at the end of all 5 months, the angler with the 4 highest scores will be crowned our Master Angler Series champion, which will be fun and cool. It's something different. A lot of anglers have reached out to me and said, I just want to get back into fun fishing. And then a lot of people can also like really get burnt out on bass fishing of going after. So it's just a fun thing to do. Especially I try to team it up with some of the lakes that we do, like Otter, for example. We're going out there in May. Otter is a great white bass lake. So on top of like pre-fishing for tournaments and everything like that, if you get a bycatch of a white bass, that's great. Put it on the board, you know? So it's like just more fun. And I try to team that up with the lakes we're going to throughout the season.
More fun's good.
Yeah. That's my big feedback every year, is everybody just wants to have more fun. And I put this series together, and I think it's going to be more fun. It's kind of like the replacement for the bracket series that we tried to do in the past couple of years. So hopefully it'll get a little bit more involvement, and hopefully everybody will like it, and we'll continue to do it.
So any public water in Illinois?
Any public water in Illinois, yep.
Okay.
As long as, I think it's like really probably what I need to limit it to is any public water that's listed on the IDNR places to fish, you know, which that is just loaded full of places to fish. So
hey, so what's the biggest crappie you guys ever caught? What do you think, Matt? What's your personal record?
My best was on Ren in the fall. I've got a 17-inch crappie that weighed 2 3/4 pounds. I have not pushed that 3 pound. That is a goal. but I have not got there yet.
Mine
On the
was
bank.
I wasn't even fishing for crappie. I was fishing in a small pond that I didn't even know had crappie in it, and I was using a smoking shad fluke, and I caught a 15.5 inch crappie on there. It was just, and then the crazy thing was is like I caught one like 15.5, and then like I don't know, 12 casts later, I caught another like 15.25, like back to back. I was like, I didn't even know these things existed in here. And then to catch two monsters was out of this world, you know? Me and Darren have a bet going on. So if there's a fish over 15 inches submitted, he owes me a tournament entry fee. And if there's one that's not over 15 inches, I owe him a tournament entry fee this season. So I'm banking on somebody catching a nice one.
That's going to depend on where you are in April.
All right. So if we could pick three lures or three baits that a new crappie fisherman from a kayak should carry with them if they had to pick only three new baits, because what would you have them get?
I would start with a tube jig, like whether it's that little hustler that we were talking about earlier. I would also maybe say, especially for somebody that's kind of early into it, a beetle spin is not a bad option if they're just kind of wanting to throw something out, reel it back in. It's got a little bit of flash, and then third, maybe a live minnow.
Hey, there you go, Matt. What do you think? What would be your top three for a new angler?
So for me, you can tell from me, I've gotten down a lot of rabbit holes, right? So if we're going just three, we want to keep it really simple. A black and chartreuse tube, like the 1.5 inch size, that is a great place to start. Like if you just have to go out, if I had to have one, that would be my one. For me, number two, I like the baby shad in a blue ice or like a blue and white tube. If you're wanting to just get all tubes, because again, you're getting what you got. We're grabbing a couple things. We're going fishing. And my third one is that red and chartreuse. So I want those three color categories covered. I do like to put a different profile in there. I prefer that baby shad for my clear. That blue ice color is a really good one. But a good shad color that you feel confident in, and then a really bright tube is what it would be for me. So my contrast, my really bright, and something natural. Those are my three. For me, it's black and chartreuse, red and chartreuse, blue ice.
He mentioned something there, Matt, and I'm curious what you think about it. How often do you use like a spike it or like any kind of alteration lure stuff on your crappie gear? Often. Okay.
So I've been using the gel based scents. Patsuki has been my favorite for the last 2 years now. They make a fire gel. They have, I think it's 26 different scents. If we're keeping it simple, the shad and the garlic are phenomenal. It's a jar. I can dip my finger in, like that's it. I touch my finger to the stuff and I rub that on my jigs, and I might go 45 minutes or an hour before I've got to reapply. The other one I actually just learned today talking with a buddy, and it was super good. He still uses the crappie niblets, which I don't know if you guys have used,
Oh yeah.
but they're a pain in the butt, man. Like you got to dump some out on the floor of your boat or on right out in front of you so they can dry out a little bit, because otherwise you set the hook and they'll come right off. You catch a fish, you've got to put another one on if that's what's working. And he takes them and puts them in like a regular syringe. I think I've actually got one here, like a syringe, and he's going to go ahead and dump his crappie magnets or crappie niblets in there and insert that and mash them down, and then take your
inside the tube,
push it in the tube and push those niblets and fill that tube with your crappie niblets that are now mashed up.
That's
and that
so
actually
cool.
was what caught us some fish today. So that one was really good. I just learned it today and I love it.
That is cool. That's a takeaway I will
that's
definitely use. I'm gonna have to go find where I can buy a syringe now. But
Bro King.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. So talked about the three favorite baits. Let's talk about three favorite places to catch a mess of crappie. Matt, what do you think?
I'm not going to give my spots away, but seriously, this time of year, that shallow bite is it for me. So if we're in a spot where we've got some flooding and we've got some tall weeds or grass that have been matted down and creating that nasty mat, going right through the middle of that stuff with your jig, that is my number one. Like
really?
you pull those fish out of 2 foot of water through nasty stuff. That is a fun, like that is flipping a jig for bass, but crappie style. Like that
Yeah, that's
is
brave with that light line you're talking about.
well, 8-pound line, I mean, even if I get a
Yeah.
2-pound fish, I feel thumped like we're pulling. Like if I miss one, my jig is shooting up in the air. I mean, we're
Yeah.
not trying to play with him in the water. Like when I set the hook, they're coming out of the water and they're going toward the bank. We're trying to get these fish in.
Josh, what about you?
I like lakes that are close to my house.
Yeah.
I think St. Chris is a great crappie lake, especially that west arm, because there's just so much timber that's in the water that's just like falling over. I think it's a great spot for somebody that can go up there. That west arm can get pretty muddy in the spring, but that just only makes them closer to the structure, in my opinion. So it's a good place to fish. I like crappie fishing at Coffeen. That's kind of where I got my roots cut in for crappie fishing. And then the one that I didn't really want to mention, but we've already mentioned on the podcast, is DuQuoin. I like going out there and catching them. That's a fun place to fish.
Nice.
It's good numbers lake. That's a really good numbers lake. I guess if we're talking specific lakes, Rend is my home. DuQuoin is probably the second one. And after that, I mean, I'm pulling up Google Maps. Where can I go fishing? Those are just the ones that are close for me. Favorite spot for me is my favorite way to catch them.
Nice.
Anywhere you go, we're going to go catch some fish.
So once you get those fish in the boat, you get them home. What's your favorite way to cook them?
Yeah, I mean any kind of fish fry is good as long as it hits the hot grease. That's where it wants to be.
Big Andes guy. I like to mix the Andes Red and the Andes Cajun. But a buddy of mine got me on Kentucky Colonel. Makes a seasoned flour, and mixing that with that Andes Red, and you get the cornmeal and flour, makes it real crispy. It's a good little treat there.
Oh, nice. Good suggestion. Good tip.
I will say, and that's Matt who taught it to me, when you get those crappie fillets home and you got them, you're getting ready to bag them up, you got them in that bowl of water, right? Let them sit, stir it up with your hands, and let it sit for like 3, 4, 5 minutes, and you'll literally see like the grease and the oil start to form in that bowl. Dump that water out, pour some fresh water in, do it again. I usually do it 2 or 3 times, and you can really pull that grease and oil out of that fish, and it just makes it so much better when you go to eat it.
Wow. Great tip.
You get when you do that right, you should get the look of why the Louisiana call it sacale, which is sack of milk. You want that white meat in that bag.
White flesh.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Well, guys, I want to thank you for all your time tonight. This has been really informative. When I started, I was a person who didn't know much about crappie. Still don't have much experience, but at least I have a better idea. I've got a great list now of 3 top baits or a few top baits that all 3 of you had suggested. And now I can go to my local tackle shop, and we even showed some things that, if you don't have a local tackle shop, go to Walmart. There's some, supplies at Walmart you can pick up. And make sure you can get on the lake and bring home some nice crappie to hit the hot grease. Any final thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I'd just say crappie fishing is down to its roots. It's for fun. Get out there with some friends, get some cheap baits, and then go home and bring some dinner home. It's just fun. It's great.
Nice.
I'm going to throw in the point. Don't pass up these little sticks in the spring. You don't pass it. If you're just out there and you're in the boat, you're walking the bank, you just see a stick in the water, take a minute, put a jig there, give it 5 seconds. If you get bit, then try it again. If not, okay, move on. But try it. That fish,
you never know.
Does not take much to hold these fish, especially this time of year.
That's great advice. Matt, it's been nice to meet you and have you on the podcast tonight. A wealth of information. I'll have to have you back again sometime. Thanks for cutting into your day. So, your sleeping schedule, working midnight, so you could join us. So appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, man, I had a great time.
All right.
Thanks for
joining
us,
guys.
Matt.
All right. For everybody watching tonight, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We will have more multi-species videos coming out here in the next few months. So don't forget, if you haven't done it already, is there any openings at the sick tournament trails? Is there any memberships available still?
I think we're down to like our last 3 or 4 memberships
available.
So
there's only 3 or 4 memberships available, but they are available. So this time this goes out, probably will be 1 or 2 available. So have a good night, everybody.